school is not the same as the firm. When we think about markets and we think about firms, we think about how a firm can become more lean and mean in order to compete with other firms, how it can use less resources and less personnel and less space, less time in order to compete well. A school is something completely different than that. To say that a school should become lean and mean in order to compete is never going to work. School needs more personnel, more resources, more time, more space in order to serve our students well. So that it's like comparing apples to oranges, and I call that magical thinking.
I know there's an economic dimension to all of this too, and an international dimension. You both work internationally. So would you talk a little bit about the motivation to see adult education through an economic lens?
Well, I mean, through an economic lens, I think, of course, there's a lot of different kinds of training programs that adults can go through. And so in terms of the contribution, and particularly looking at women coming into the workforce, and the more education that women get and the more skills that they have, then the more enables them to be able to come back into the workforce. Now, having said that, one of the reasons to add the social dimension or the social change dimension to that education is because we know from statistics that whether women have the same level of education and the same level of experience, everything else in society will be against them, that they will have a lower wage. They will automatically be paid less. There will automatically be certain kinds of things that happen to them. So when you're adding in adult education, when you're training women or teaching women and giving them those skills to go into the workforce, you also want to be looking at some of the systemic problems in society so that they can begin to think about those differently and work in different ways to address those as well as going into the workforce. It's not good enough to just go into the workforce and know that you're going to be paid less. I mean, that's not good enough. There needs to be some kind of way in which you can be, as a citizen, engage with some of these systemic problems in society and make change with those. So that's probably a way of marrying the idea of the training to get better work and get into the workforce and jobs, but also some kind of a critical consciousness which enables you to work with others to bring about more systemic change in society.
And there's still another angle, another way, in addition to what Darlene is saying, where adult education and the economic come together in a period that we are in of moving from from recession to renewal. The economies of particularly our small towns, our coastal towns, which have been so hard hit by the closing down of the fishery, or the limitation of the fishery, or the downturn in forestry because of the building slowdown, particularly in the United States. There's a need for a transition, an economic transition, in a town like Port Alberni on the west coast of Vancouver Island. In the way that the town of Port Alberni is tackling this is by bringing people together from different sectors and looking at what the assets are in that town, so that not expecting miracles coming from the provincial government or even the federal government, but looking at what the assets are in that community, and there are many, and then creating a learning environment for the the sports fishermen to interact with the people that have got the bed and breakfast industry, to talk with the people in the mill, the pulp and paper mill that's there, to talk with the transportation people, to so that they can learn to work together to strengthen, and this kind of stuff we call community economic development, to build that community economic infrastructure such that the quality of the economic quality and the well-being of the community will be such so that it becomes attractive for the larger scale investment, either development or industrial or forestry or whatever that might come into it. So it's got a very direct, there's many ways in which paying attention to the learning dimensions really can work on both a social justice as well as an economic side.
assembly line model had a huge impact on science, and it is the foundation of our current scientific model, scientific method. I went back to do my master's degree before I took a course in the philosophy of science. Having had an undergraduate degree in science and teaching science for many years, it was when I went back to do my master's degree that I was opened up to this huge area of where do these ideas come from? How do they form? How does a current historical and political context form those ideas? And we don't teach kids about that in science education, and I think we should. And I think we should teach it to them in a context where they look at philosophy and writing and English and history and science together and see how ideas are formed.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about, give us some kind of quantitative scale of what the shortfall is as you perceive it, so that the public don't think we're, talking about doubling the school budget or something. About, what is the margin that, from your point of view, we're short in our funding as a percentage, for example?
Yeah. Well, for example, our budget's about $485 million for the Vancouver School District, and we're having to cut $7.12 million out for this current year. So obviously that would help us do, at least keep going with what we have at this point in time. But as I mentioned to you, over the past 6 years, we've had to cut back $45 million out of that budget. So it's substantial, and it's really taken away our ability to meet the needs of all kids. And I think what we need to do is, get our parents and our partner groups to join us in advocating for the kind of funding we need to make education the investment it should be. I mean, there's a lot of conversation these days about infrastructure projects. I can't think of a better thing than a social infrastructure project such as education. In the end, if we want to deal with some of the challenges like poverty, youth, and gangs, the place to invest is in early education, early childhood education. So I think we should be making the case for additional resources to education so we can prevent some of the, the challenges we're facing right now in our communities.
When I first came to SFU, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. So I started into a specialized French cohort program and got involved in the French Student Union, thinking for sure that I wanted to go into journalism. When I got into my second semester, I suddenly wasn't so sure what I wanted to do anymore. So I started to explore a little bit. Archaeology, communications, history, even kinesiology. And then I decided to go on exchange to France for a year. I was really enjoying my history classes and quickly realized that's what I wanted to study. But all the exploring I had done in other departments still counted towards my degree. I also got involved in campus life. I was an orientation leader for a year, became a community advisor in residence, helped start a choir, I even took a rowing course. Now I'm in my 5th year studying a history major and French and poli-sci minors, and I'm still involved in residence. I'm an area coordinator now and working on sustainability initiatives around campus. After SFU, I have lots of possibilities of what I could do. International development, leadership, teaching, but whatever I do, I know I'll be ready for it.
I would say that most citizens in British Columbia want their children and want their neighbors' children to grow up to be wise, ethical, and responsible. And that is more than a matter of factual, of information and facts. Information and facts are important. Equally, if not more important, is the ability to think soundly and to act responsibly.
How about from your point of view, Charles? Do we stray a great distance from the simple curriculum of facts and data to get at the sort of objectives that Michael was talking about?
Can you say more?
Is this a different kind of learning than the kind of learning that many people associate with school? You learn your multiplication tables, you learn how to spell, you learn grammar. These qualities he's talking about, how do you really teach those? That's not factual knowledge, that's something else.
These qualities that Michael's talking about and that I very much respect are not always factual knowledge. They're about how we interact with the world. Once again, I'll describe this transition from the private sphere, from the home, to the public sphere. Right? The school is a way point. Right? It's a way station. When I go to school, I learn that the teacher helps me to interact, to play well with other children, to understand other children who are not exactly like me. And those are intangible. Those are not the same as reading, writing, and arithmetic. But that's what teachers endeavor to do on a day-to-day basis. It's very important.
So it sounds to me like the culture of the school and the interpersonal relations of the school are key in the sorts of things you're talking about, the character of the teacher, the quality of the interaction between the teacher and the students, all these interpersonal things that we associate with relationships.
And they're not separate from learning to read and write and understand science and history and music and art. They weave in.
Would you say that this dimension of schooling that you're describing contributes to motivation in students? Does it have a role to play in motivating the students to want to learn the fact-based or data-driven aspect of the curriculum?
Absolutely. If schools were just about facts and data, then schools as we know them could disappear. All right? When the television came out, people proclaimed that the television would replace schools and teachers. When the computer came out, people said, oh, there's no need for teachers anymore. People can teach themselves on the web. Well, guess what? Students can teach themselves, but it doesn't happen very easily. So we need teachers who are there to motivate students. It's not hard to go to the library and pick up a book on mathematics. One can teach oneself to do mathematics, but it doesn't happen. Why? Because we need teachers who have a broader set of skills to motivate students.
So we see these relationships contributing to the life of the curriculum in the school, and the interactions of the teachers lead the students to be engaged with the more fact-driven aspects of the curriculum. This is what I hear you saying.
Well, it's just really important that we learn to become responsible in a mature way. If I had to sum up this question of the purpose, we help children to grow up to become wise, ethical, and responsible. And to become responsible is a long-term life process. And it is not enough to simply have a whole body of facts.
Would you say that things like sports, student government, and extracurricular activities, science fairs, and these sorts of things which are not a part of necessarily what's examined are contributing also to this aspect of school life?
These are as important, if not more important, than reading, writing, and arithmetic. They help to motivate students, and they are goods in themselves. Most of us, when we think about schools, we think about those times that we flourished, say, on a sporting team, right? Or in band, or in shop, which is not reading, writing, and arithmetic. Those.
And are you saying, Charles, that this is a change from the way schools were before progressivism? That schools were more the 3 R's and rote learning, and that a change has occurred in the past century or so to give more significant value to these other dimensions of the school experience?
I think that progressivism heralded in a movement towards connecting knowledge with experience. Okay, so we realize now that we aren't thinking machines. That we need to connect what we learn with what we do in the broader spectrum of how life unfolds.
So the interpersonal and emotional climate, the relationships that exist within the school are all vital to having a quality school. And the dimensions of the school are not just economic, but include things like citizenship and even self-realization or fulfillment of the individual personality. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, and if I can say, literacy is incredibly important, but it's more than a simple decoding of words on a page.
It's a whole critical literacy. It's to understand the ideals of cultures, and it's to understand your own ideals, and it's to be able to converse with people and make sense of the world and to share your sense of the world. So it's not a case of setting aside literacy or anything of that sort, but of including it in this whole development of a well-rounded citizen and person.
There is a school in the interior of BC that is using, and it's not so much that they're using accountability testing for seeing the success of their students, but what they are seeing is that these students are from grade kindergarten to about grade 6. They are in an immersion program for language and culture. And that these students, they come from all different backgrounds. They're in this small little program, and then they leave to go to the public system for their grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And they're finding, and what the findings are stating, is that these students are actually staying in school, and that they may have all of these other things happening in their lives that they have no control over, but they have a sense of self, that they have a strong foundation in language and culture, that when they enter into these public systems that are not, they don't see their parents or relatives that are teaching in these schools, but they feel a sense of identity that's strong. They can speak their language, and they carry with them a purpose for why they're there.
Adult education, we sometimes talk about it as being lifelong, throughout the lifespan. So there are different kinds of learning needs when you're a young person or getting started with a family or a job or in mid-career, and even as we grow older, I'm 65 years old, so even at a retirement age, it's a very rich time for learning. And obviously, I've got a mother who's 90 years old. She's still learning. So that's the lifelong. And then life-wide means we learn in schools and those formal settings, but we also all of us learn on the job. We learn in the context of our community engagement. We learn in the context of hobbies. We learn in the context of, of international events, or many of us have been following, in the early 2009, a lot of the political changes in the U.S. And so we were a lot of learning happening there around politics. So it happens. They say that the formal learning of adults, that the vast, something like 80% of the learning of adults is actually in the informal. So if you were to measure learning patterns in any of the three of us, most of what we learn probably is happening in the informal. That's the kind of the unorganized and the almost unintended.
Okay, well, I hear you describing setting and purpose, and I'm going to ask you now to talk about curriculum and instruction. Does that differ in adult education?
I would argue, well, perhaps it shouldn't, but maybe it does. I think that probably young people could learn in the same way. But one of the things with adult education is most of the learning, other than skills training and things like that, and even those do to some extent, is to start with where the learner is at and to use real life experiences and the real knowledge and the person's knowledge as a basis for moving forward. So beginning with what people know and then adding pieces of information to this to build on what they know and help them make connections with that, and then the dialogue within the group of making sense and meaning of what people know, the new information coming in, and what other people are knowing. And so it's building and circling around in terms of the dialogue, and that's predominantly. And the curriculum is, it can have a curriculum focus in that you are trying to put something across, you're trying to teach some content, but a lot of the content is based on what people know already as they come into that classroom, and that's what you pay a lot of attention to, is what they know, how they know it, and how you can help them make sense out of that and move forward with that knowledge and build.
Just like special education, sometimes we just say the need is there so clearly for excellent methodology that we deliver it there, but it would be good for everybody to receive excellent methodology.
Yes.
Adults, I think, demand acknowledgement of their life experience, perhaps, and then we build on that.
And more active engagement as well.
Yes, and as Darlene's saying, that in terms of the approaches to the instruction, when you look at the kind of instruction in adult education, so much of the emphasis is on group learning, different ways of people working together, whether in smaller or larger groups, so that group process in the 60s, when there was a lot of emphasis on kind of humanistic psychology and all those group process kinds of things. Adult education, some of the great figures in adult education like Roby Kidd or Malcolm Knowles in the US. Roby Kidd is a Canadian adult educator, Malcolm Knowles an American. They basically took a lot of the learning out of that kind of humanistic psychology and that group process stuff, brought that to the craft of teaching adults.
Yes, it seems implied in this that there's a good bit of acknowledgement of lifespan developmental psychology, that adults are different essentially than younger people, that there are stages of life, and in those stages of life we need to be communicated with in different ways, and we have different goals and purposes. I hear that implied in what you're saying.
There's quite a stream of in adult education, in the academic field of adult education, of both research and teaching, that is built around that whole stages, how adults learn throughout their lives. And as you say, at different times in your lives, when we're entering into a relationship, or we're exiting a relationship, or our children are leaving home, or there's been a death of a loved one, all of these different kinds of stages in our lives trigger they create an opportunity and a need within each of us for some kind of learning, and so there's a lot of attention to these stages in life as well.
Yet people don't think of going to education to get them through transitions in life, but that they may be going to the university to get, like, our Masters of Arts and Liberal Studies or liberal arts, but underlying that might be a motivation to actually help themselves to the next stage in life.
Very interesting that I would say in the 1980s and 90s, there was a huge return to particularly to graduate programs in adult education in the United States and Canada by women who were re-entering the workforce. They had been at home, they had raised the small kids, and they, for a lot of different reasons were wanting to re-enter the workforce, and they were coming in, but they were also coming in because it was a time when they were re-examining their own role in their own family and their own role in society. So they were, in fact, coming to graduate school, but in that learning that they thought was sort of skills-oriented or job-oriented, they were finding that it was a space of enormous personal change, and as we know, historically, an enormous time for change, for women in our society.
The environmental learning curriculum, could you review those for us?
Sure. We use a mnemonic of CARE in this environmental learning and experience document, and CARE is sort of the big picture. We want people to care, but it's also an acronym for 4 other themes: complexity, aesthetics, responsibility, and ethics. And complexity underlies sort of the systems approach to thinking about the environment, and that systems approach is sort of complex ecological systems as well as social systems and how those interact. The aesthetic, speaks to people's awareness and their emotional engagement with the environment. Even when you talk to scientists, often their way into teaching and learning about the environment was an aesthetic appreciation and an emotional connection to a particular place, let's say a park. The R is responsibility, and that's where action and advocacy around the environment take place. And then finally, that development of an environmental ethic as being the key goal, where it imbues your values and it's the way you live your life.
I'm impressed at the way the design of environmental learning is really state-of-the-art in terms of any curriculum and instruction. I suppose to some degree it's because it's a relatively new entrant into the curriculum and you have the opportunity to do things with all current knowledge in place. One of the things you talked about in other venues was the nature of infusing something into the curriculum as opposed to having a discrete course for it. Would you talk about the relative merits of having a course for environmental learning as opposed to infusing environmental learning across the curriculum?
Right. Yes. Well, in BC, we've adopted this infusion model quite deliberately, and all of the curriculum frameworks and approaches look at environmental learning as being embedded across all the subjects and disciplines K to 12. We actually have curricular maps that show how these 4 themes of complexity, aesthetics, and responsibility and ethics can be found in learning outcomes in the sciences, in the social studies, in arts, in language arts. And the notion is that all education could be environmental education. Now, this is in contrast with other jurisdictions which have created sometimes environmental science curricula, and those tend to be more monodisciplinary, like so you could have an environmental science program. You might look at complexity, but you may not get to values and ethics and so on in that kind of curriculum. Also, politically, it's suspect because in times of cutbacks and so on, for example, the Harris government in Ontario removed the environmental science curriculum completely out of the Ontario curriculum. And they could do that because it was a discrete outlier and not mandated curriculum in terms of core. So there are people that argue for either approach, but in BC we've had a lot of success using the infusion approach, and it's working, I think.